Hello, everyone.
Hey there, folks.
This is AV,
This is Rita.
and you're listening to I Don't Know Her, the podcast where we talk about women
And some other folks.
that you've probably never heard of,
But you should have.
and now you will.
Alrighty.
So if you're a longtime listener, you know that we usually do some fun little banter beforehand. Sometimes it's rants, sometimes it's jokes, sometimes it's stories. But today, we're not going to do that. And that is because the subject I'm talking about is very serious. And I do think it would do a disservice to the survivors of what I'm about to talk about to joke around before we talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
So Rita has graciously agreed.
Yeah, I think let's just dive right in.
So one thing before we start, massive trigger warnings, content warnings for sexual violence, for physical violence, war, abuse, subjugation, all of the above.
Okay.
So if you are sensitive to those topics, this might be one that you skip, though I really hope you don't, and that you're able to bear witness to these stories because they're very important. Okay, are we ready?
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to tell you the story of Kim Hak-Sun.
I don't know her.
She was the comfort woman who broke the silence and changed the narrative about comfort women forever.
Okay.
You probably don't know what a comfort woman is.
My understanding is they were used in times of wartime
Mm-hmm.
and given to soldiers to basically have sex was the main thing.
Yeah, that was
Yeah.
the only thing. So, yes, that is correct. I'm going to give you... So, one of the things I learned as I was, researching both Kim's story in general, but also the context of Kim's story, is I don't know a whole lot about Asian history. And a lot of what ends up happening in sort of the systems in place that allow what happens to Kim and to many other women to happen has to do with historical context, where things were both in Asia, the continent of Asia, in Korea, and in Japan and China. So, I'm going to give you a little brief rundown, as brief as I possibly can, about the history of imperialist Japan,
Okay.
because it's very important. It's of the utmost importance to the story.
Okay.
So, I don't know where you're at with your history of China or Asia or Japan or Korea.
Probably on the same page as you.
Yeah, I find continuously as I learn more history as I age, I was really into history when I was young, and I did well in history classes. I even thought about having a history double major or a minor in college because I really enjoyed it. And I still find that I know nothing about certain areas of history, and one of them has to be Asian history.
Mm-hmm.
So during the latter half of the 19th century, that's where I'm starting. I'm not even starting way back when. I'm starting in the 19th century. And throughout the first half of the 20th century, Japan was seeking to dominate the continent of Asia. They wanted to take over the whole damn place.
Mm-hmm.
So they invaded and pursued military conflict in China, Taiwan, Korea, and many more places. The Philippines, you name it. They were invading. It was after the First Sino-Japanese War and the Russo-Japanese War that Japan occupied Taiwan and Korea. And then during World War I, Japan aligned with the U.S., and so they were allowed to take over areas after World War I that had been previously occupied by Germany. So they were areas of the Pacific and areas of China. So following World War I, Japan is now... legally in the eyes of the international world allowed to have parts of China instead of Germany.
Okay.
And I mean, nobody should have been occupying it, but whatever.
Yeah.
Following World War I, Japan, along with the rest of the world, fell into the Great Depression. And just like it did in many other areas of the world, that Great Depression led to a rise in right-wing political movements and propaganda and nationalism.
Really?
Yes. So that's how,
Intense.
that's how the rise of the Nazis came about. And in Japan, that was no different. The nationalism among the Japanese, this imperialist idea that all of the land of Asia should basically be under Japanese control, it became not only a vibe in the government, but a vibe among the people. And Japan then decided to pursue expansion and occupation of other countries and areas of Asia. In 1931, Japan invaded and occupied Manchuria, which was at that time an area of China that was highly disputed. It's on the northeastern part of the country. And at the time, though, this was seen as a real fucked up move by the international community. So at the time, the League of Nations, Japan was a part of the League of Nations post World War One. And so their takeover of Manchuria was seen as a violation of the League of Nations they condemned Japan for doing that. So then Japan withdrew from the League of Nations in 1933, and by 1936 had joined Germany and eventually became one of the Axis powers in World War II.
Wow, that seems like a really bad move.
It didn't work out well for anyone.
No.
So in 1937, Japan begins to invade other parts of China, and this is what leads to what's considered the Second Sino-Japanese War, concurrently with World War II. Actually, a lot of scholars believe that this invasion of Manchuria in 1931 is really the kickoff of World War II, period. Because World War II technically didn't start till 1939, but this was the beginning. It's truly when shit started hitting the fan across the world. So during this time, the Japanese military committed horrific and brutal acts of violence on Chinese civilians. One of the most widely known and discussed incidents is known as the Nanjing Massacre or the Rape of Nanking, which you might have heard of.
It sounds familiar.
Yeah, it was this really horrific, terrible thing where the Japanese imperialist army invaded Nanking and just committed brutal acts of violence across the area. And they are said to have killed at least 100,000 people. Some people, their estimates are up to 300,000.
Oh my God.
And they raped every woman brutally. Many of the women died.
Jeez.
Yeah, it was really horrific. So this became pretty well known among, Chinese people that this happened. And of course, that meant that people were not too thrilled to have Japanese people around, the Japanese army and stuff like that. So there was pretty strong anti-Japanese sentiments across China, not only because of their invasion and occupation of areas of China, but also because of this horrific massacre. And it's important that that is in mind because that is exactly why the Japanese created comfort stations.
Okay.
So as they were continuing their conquest of areas of Asia, they decided that they didn't want to cause basically there to be so much animosity among the communities that they were invading that they might create guerrilla warfare. So their answer to that was, we better stop raping their women. Which seems I don't know. It seems obvious.
Yeah.
But the government decided that their answer to that was to basically create rape centers.
I was going to say enslave and continue to rape.
Yes.
But in a more formal way?
Yeah, it was actually very formal. So there were specific rules laid out by the Japanese government, by the Japanese military, about how these stations were supposed to be set up and how they were supposed to be run and who was going to work there and what the stipulations were. So one of the stipulations was that the men had to wear condoms. One of the stipulations was that women would be inspected weekly by a doctor. And if they had diseases, they'd be taken out. Okay. So they would no longer be in service. So there was this idea that okay, well, if we provide them women to rape, then they won't rape other women.
No.
Seems
not
cool.
How that works.
But the thing is that they originally set this up and it was just a few places and they were employing Japanese women who had already been working as sex workers.
Okay.
So slightly more voluntary. But that's not how that ended up continuing. So as the stations began to spread across the country, they were starting to take women. So one thing that's important to know is that all of the stations were military run. However, well, not all of them. Most of them were military run. Some of them were like the military opened it and started it from the beginning. Some of them were private, like people who worked on the military's behalf. And then just a very small smattering of them were actually just private. And the military just used it.
Okay.
But because they were setting up these stations like everywhere, there were obviously a limited number of Japanese women who worked as sex workers.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That's pretty obvious. So as they were expanding and creating more comfort stations in more locations, they had to have more women.
Well, supply and demand, so might as well just take them.
Yes, and the military actually had a document it somewhere that said they wanted a woman for every 100 soldiers.
Those are the odds?
Yeah.
Yikes.
Yeah, it's pretty fucking bad.
Yeah.
So they, obviously, because of that, there was a lot of people within the military and outside of the military who were working for the military that were taking women, either by like kidnapping, like literal just like fucking taking them. Some of them were being tricked and being told that they were going to be able to work in a factory and be able to send money home to their families.
I mean, that's still used today.
Yes, some were coerced, some were tricked, some were coaxed. Most of the women ended up having no idea what they were walking into. And they were often also from quote unquote lower classes and also quote unquote lower ethnicities. So there was like a hierarchy of ethnicities. And so like Japanese is up here at the top and like down here at the bottom are like Koreans and Filipinos.
Mm-hmm.
So those are the people that they're taking more of are these so-called lower classes. So they are poor women from like usually communities that have been ravaged already by the Japanese and whose like families have no resources and no way to help them. So these women are getting taken, some as young as, I should not even say women, some were as young as 14 when they were taken. So they're little kids, they're children.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the context in which we're going to be discussing the tragic but very courageous life of Kim Hak-Sun.
Okay.
So Kim Hak-Sun was born in Jilin, Manchuria, which is in northeastern China, on October 20th, 1924. Her parents had migrated to China from Pyongyang, Korea, a few years prior to escape Japanese colonial rule.
Yeah.
So that's why they were in China in the first place. Her parents actually married when her mother was just 15, and her father died like 3 months after she was born.
Whoa, okay.
So her mom was like a single mother in the 20s.
A teenager.
Yes. A teenager in the 20s living in China and like doesn't know anything. And at this point, the Japanese started to occupy Manchuria. So once again, they're under this oppressive rule. And Hak-Sun, when she turned 2 years old, her mother was like, we got to get the fuck out of here, and packed them up, and they returned to Pyongyang. And at least they had some family there, right? Like she had brothers and sisters she ended up having to beg from. Hak-Sun's mother did. So for this brief time in her life, Hak-Sun was actually pretty happy. She attended a missionary school for free. She went to church. She recalls this time in her life really fondly. This is what she said later on. I enjoyed lessons, sports, and playing with friends. I was good at running, and I often won relay races. I was able to learn what I wanted to learn. I was able to play when I wanted to play. Unfortunately, that didn't last long for Hak-Sun. When she was 14, her mother remarried, and she did not get along with her stepfather at all.
Okay.
And she always had been a bit headstrong. Her mom sounded like kind of a shitty person. Her mom would be like, you're the reason your dad died because you're too headstrong.
No.
Just shitty stuff.
Awful.
And so here she is. She's 14. You know,
She's being 14. She's pushing back to mom's new husband.
She doesn't like mom's new dude. So she's very rebellious, very, very teenagery, right? And so her mother was like, "Oh my God, you're so stubborn." And fed up with Hak-Sun's rebellious nature, she and her mother and her stepfather sent her off to a foster family. It sounds to me like they sold her.
Okay.
Um, because there is a money exchange happening and she is just living with a different family all of a sudden.
Okay, that's being sold.
Yeah, and the foster father wanted Hak-Sun to become what was known at the time as a kiseng. And it's a girl who entertains upper class men. Not sexually, necessarily.
Just paying for company?
It was a specific kind of training. You would go to an academy, and it was always lower class girls, and they would learn how to write poetry and recite poetry, and they'd learn songs and dances, like really traditional stuff.
Okay.
And so they would have traditional garb on, and they would do these like entertainment things for men, and they usually like aged out by the time they were like 28 to 30. And so often after that, they would have nowhere to go or nothing to do unless they had become a concubine of a wealthy man. So obviously there was some sexual stuff.
Yeah.
It wasn't that it was initially designed as a sexual thing, but it certainly had that element to it.
Okay.
So he signs up Hak-Sun and another girl that he has taken in, this foster dad.
Okay.
To go to this Kiseng academy. She was a really good student, Hak-Sun was, and after 2 years she graduated and could go into business as a certified Kiseng. However, the law at the time was that girls had to be at least 19 in order to get their license, and she was only 17.
Okay.
So the foster father was real pissed that he had...
I mean, if he looked into the rules, wouldn't he have known that she had to be 19?
I know. Well, and he's also like, well, but she looks older, so can't she just pass?
Okay.
That didn't work.
So he's trying to rush it.
He is. He just wants to make money off of them, off these two girls. So he's pissed that they cannot work in Korea. So he packs them up and decides to take these two girls to China to see if he can make money off of them there. And it's 1941 at this point. She's 17 years old. World War II is in full swing. And that means that the Japanese have now controlled large portions of China, including Beijing, which is where Hak-Sun and this other foster girl were taken by the foster father. So they're eating lunch at a restaurant. They've just arrived in Beijing. And there are Japanese soldiers there because there's Japanese soldiers everywhere. And they see him eating with these two young women. And they're like, I think he's a spy. I don't know if that was the pretense they were using to detain this guy and then take the girls, or if they really did think he was a spy. But in any case...
Could be either or.
Yeah, like one soldier carted this guy off, and then these other soldiers, once the guy was no longer watching, took the two girls and threw them into the back of a truck. And the truck was full of soldiers, and there was an identical truck following behind them. And the girls are obviously fucking terrified. They're crying. They're holding each other. They're huddled together in a corner, but that's just now their fate. They never see their foster father again. And they travel all through the night in this truck. Eventually, they get taken to a house that had been abandoned by Chinese civilians who were fleeing from the Japanese military. And it was in this house that Hak-Sun is raped for the first time. She had initially resisted the officer, and so she was subjected to some pretty horrific beatings. And she didn't know until the next day, but there was just like a curtain that separated areas of this room. And on the other side of the curtain is her foster sister, who's experiencing the same thing.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah. Again, this is a very heavy topic.
Yes.
But I think it's very fucking important. As someone who experienced sexual abuse as a child, I have done a lot of work in my adulthood to try to raise awareness of these kinds of things and to talk about them openly so that there isn't that shame that surrounds them.
Yeah, and like we said before, every story we tell is not going to be a happy or funny story.
And this one is so fucking important. And I'll get to that part. I think it's really worth sticking through these really hard parts because if you have been a victim in any way or a survivor, then you know how much resilience and strength you have to just keep living, let alone do something. Okay, so back to the hard part. So the next day, Hak-Sun hears these women talking outside the room, and she realizes they're all speaking in Korean. And so it's her and her foster sister, and then there are 3 other women in the facility. And they, like, when she comes out and is like, oh my God, tell me, what am I doing here? Where are we? What's happening? What's going on? These women were like, how old are you? When were you taken? And they're like, man, you're fucked. Basically.
Oh my gosh.
This one woman was like, this is just your life now.
This is your SOL. Shit out of luck.
And because these 2 girls were new, these sort of veterans of the facility decide that, because like this one girl ends up being kind of like in charge, and she sends the roughest men to these 2 girls so that they're spared. And it's like, I get it, but God, that seems shitty.
Yeah. Well, when you take humanity away from people, it just gets so vile. Yeah. Especially when people are abused, then they become abusers.
Yeah, and like, I mean, also like you want to survive. I mean, I don't necessarily blame this girl for wanting to look out for herself. So the house was next to a military unit. There were 5 women. Hak-Sun and her foster sister were, when they were came into this house, given new quote unquote Japanese names. So Hak-Sun now was called Aiko, and her friend was called Amiko. Since they were the new girls, as I mentioned, they were sent the ones who were more rough or violent. So the beginning of her time as a comfort woman was especially brutal and gross. Hak-Sun said that on an average day, she served up to 7 to 8 men. Ugh. And other women later on spoke of having to serve more than that in a given day. And as I mentioned before, the men were supposed to wear condoms, and the women were given this bottle of pink antiseptic solution, and they were supposed to wash themselves in between the soldiers.
No, that would probably hurt.
I already am like, that's probably like brutal and terrible by itself.
Which means the next person, it hurts even more. It hurts even more.
So and then of course they were inspected weekly by a military doctor who would look for any signs of sexually transmitted diseases. And if they thought that they had like even the smallest of a sore, which could be from, rubbing, like anything, they were injected with this solution, which the women still don't know what it was. And some of them have permanent damage from the solution. Some died. So, like, we don't really know what it was.
What the hell?
But it was supposed to cure them. And
all of this is wrong.
Yes, it's all really bad. And the women were also forced to serve soldiers even while menstruating, which was, like, really not okay for them. According to many documents and personal accounts from the women, the soldiers paid the people who ran the comfort stations, but many of the women who came forward later on said they never saw any of that money. So, who knows? And apparently, like, lower ranked, like privates, for instance, paid less, and then like officers paid more because it was based on their salary.
Okay.
So it's like literally run by the military, right? Like it was decided like your rank pays this much for a comfort woman and your rank pays this much. And they were given to the proprietors who ran the place, which I assume was meant to like pay the bills and pay for food and things like that. But they like hardly were fed. They were given like little rice balls, and sometimes occasionally they got a biscuit. So like, they really didn't get food. So they never saw any money, and they hardly got food, and they were given the clothes that the Japanese army had found in raids as they were killing and pushing Chinese people out of their homes.
So probably just a hodgepodge pile of find an outfit.
Yes. Yeah. So it would be like used underwear, for instance. So that's what they were wearing. One morning, the women were told to pack up quickly. Like, we got to get out of here, get your shit, let's go. And the whole operation was moved further into the countryside And while this meant that there were fewer soldiers that she had to serve, Hak-Sun realized, though, that now they were even farther away from anything.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they were farther away from a city, so even if she escaped, where the fuck would she go?
And how would she know how to get there?
She wouldn't know how to get there. She doesn't know where she is. She can't speak Chinese. So she has like no way to escape. And so she falls into a really deep despair. She said that they were given alcohol, and so she started to drink a lot, which I can imagine.
Oh, yeah.
That's the only escape you could have.
Mm-hmm.
Then one night, a Korean man in his 40s came to the house and chose Hak-Sun's room. So the men could choose where they wanted to go. So sometimes they got repeat customers. In fact, often they did.
Okay.
So this man, though, was Korean, 1, and not a soldier, 2. And so that was a first for Hak-Sun. And she was very vague in her account as to how he managed to make his way in. But later on, she sort of like revealed that he had been an opium dealer in China.
Oh.
So, and there was opium mentioned also like in these comfort stations. My guess, again, this is my supposition, my guess is that he was maybe selling to the soldiers and maybe they couldn't pay enough and they were like, in return, you get this. That's my supposition, but I don't know that on fact. I know that Hak-Sun was like, I don't know how he got in. And it seems like weird that they would let a Korean, just random dude into their military-run comfort station. Mm-hmm. So as soon as he finished with her, she was like, this is my only fucking way out. This man. So she like clings to him, like wraps herself around him and is like, please, 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 please take me with you. Take me with you. Please take me with you. He, of course, was like, no.
I wonder why she chose him.
Well, because she couldn't get out with a soldier.
True. Oh, yeah. Okay.
So he's an outsider. He can literally leave.
Yeah.
And nobody else can leave, not even the soldiers, right? Like, that's where they're stationed. Mm-hmm. So this is her one opportunity to get the fuck out of there.
Okay.
And it's obvious that he can speak Japanese. He's Korean. He speaks Korean. And he tells her that he deals opium all over the country of China. So he also speaks Chinese fluently.
Yeah. And he probably knows ways of how to.
Mm-hmm. He knows people, yes. Obviously.
Yes.
He's in a nefarious trade. And he tells her, like, you know, my job is pretty dangerous. I travel all over the country. I don't stay in one place. I deal with dangerous people. And she's like, I would rather die than stay here. I would rather risk my death than stay in this fucking place. Mm-hmm. And so he finally agrees. And in the middle of the night, Hak-Sun and this man fled from the station. And I think probably one of the most heartbreaking parts of this story is that Amiko, the other girl,
she left her.
The whole time they were there, they talked all the time whenever they could, like when they were washing dishes or doing laundry or whatever, about how they wanted to escape and they were going to do it together. That they would never leave each other. And she left her because she was afraid that if she tried to bring her as well, and if they were 3 of them, they would get caught.
Yeah. And like you said, she's trying to survive.
She's trying to survive. But I think that that's probably one of her biggest regrets.
Yeah. I was going to say it's probably something she never lived down.
I mean, how could you? You just constantly would feel guilty. So she leaves with this man, and she realizes once she's outside that the seasons have passed, and it has been more than 4 months by the time she's escaped that she was kept. Now, 4 months seems like hell to me, but I listened to the testimony of a woman, and she just died a couple years ago, and she had been kept from the age of 14 to 21.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
7 years?
8. 8 years of her life. So that's any amount of time is terrible, but Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
So the man that Hak-Sun traveled with began introducing her as his wife. It's very unclear if they actually ever married, but she eventually called him her husband and he called her his wife. And again, he spoke fluent Chinese and could sometimes pass for Chinese. So they were a lot safer than they had been before. When she was 18, she became pregnant with their first child. So her husband decided then that they should settle down, and they moved to Shanghai, and that's where they decided to live for a while. She gave birth to a girl, and then later, at age 21, she gave birth to another child, and this one was a boy. They settled down. They ran a pawn shop for a Chinese businessman. It sounds like it was also kind of a weird deal.
So they eventually, I mean, it was a relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, and I mean, things were going reasonably well financially for them. This pawn shop situation seems real strange because it was like this businessman owned it, but they ran it, and it was a 50-50 deal. And I'm like, what were you really doing, though?
Okay.
You know, it just seemed like a little bit sketch.
He is an opium dealer, so there's
Yes, he was. In 1945, it's the end of World War II. After the Japanese have surrendered, Korea is finally liberated. And Hak-Sun and her family decide they want to return back to Korea. And so in 1946, they hop on a ship boarding for Korea, and that's when they decide to go back. And there was a cholera outbreak on the boat, so they ended up having to stay on the boat, just like hanging out in the water for like a couple of months. And then they were finally able to disembark, where they then stayed in a refugee camp for 3 months. And it was during this time that Hak-Sun's daughter contracted and died of cholera.
Oh.
Yeah. I mean, it was like, how
More
could you
tragedy.
avoid it? And how could you avoid it? Like, you're a refugee camp, you were on a ship. Like, it's like those people who are going on cruises right now with COVID. What are you doing? You're like, I would like to jump directly into the Petri dish, thank you. So they eventually were able to leave this refugee camp, and they settled in a small community in Seoul. Her husband worked construction, and she sold vegetables at markets. She would like go around to various markets and sell vegetables. Well, this obviously was a better life than the one she had lived in the comfort stations. Hak-Sun was actually still really miserable. She said later on that her husband was drunk and aggressive all the time, and he often used her past as a comfort woman to insult her. He called her a dirty bitch and a prostitute in front of their child.
Oh, geez.
So when he died in a building collapse, she had him cremated and did not miss him.
Whoa. That was quick. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, they were together until I think it was like the 70s or something like that when he died.
Did she make that building collapse?
No, she was actually at a vegetable market, and it was just like an architectural fucking phenomenon, and the whole building collapsed, and
God.
And he was inside it. Unfortunately, Hak-Sun's tragedy doesn't end there. When her son was in the 4th grade, she took him on a summer vacation to the sea, and while he was swimming in the ocean, he had a heart attack and died.
A heart attack?
Yeah, that's what it said.
Maybe started drowning and panicked.
Panicked.
Yeah.
That's what I was wondering. He probably probably just drowned.
Mm.
As you might imagine, Hak-Sun was now absolutely devastated. Like, her whole life has just been like tragedy after tragedy.
Yeah, everything's being ripped away from her.
And she falls into a despair that's deeper than ever before, because now she's completely alone in the world. She has nothing left, no one, nothing to live for. And she reported that she wanted to kill herself and that she tried overdosing on drugs multiple times, and it never took, I guess. She survived. And for years and years, she would make money during the day. Like, she started selling, like buying underwear in bulk and then selling them in like markets. And all the money that she made, she drank and smoked away. So she was just really in a bad place. And that she's not alone in that. Most comfort women did not fare well, as you might imagine.
Well, yeah.
Some died by suicide. Some died from venereal diseases. Many, if not most, never married, never had children, never had families. So they just did not lead what you would consider a normal life. And they couldn't talk about it. They couldn't talk about what had happened to them. It was really, at the time, a very taboo topic to talk about rape in Korean culture, and it wasn't acceptable to discuss. In fact, I want to read this quote to you. This is from a book I read called The True Stories of the Korean Comfort Women. And there's a chapter in it by a historian named Keith Howard, and this is what he wrote about the culture that the women returned to. So post the war. In 1945 and 1946, when the Comfort Women returned to Korea, they came back as Hwang-yang-no. To the Koreans around them, they were neither faithful nor chaste. They were not exemplary women. The families of Comfort Women feared the ostracism they would suffer if the shameful past was discovered. The women became an extra burden, and there was little chance to marry them off. Basically, they were damaged goods.
Yeah. No sense, no value anymore.
No, and you weren't allowed to talk about it. So you were silenced, and you had to live inside the torture of your own mind, which is why most of them ended up becoming addicts, dying by suicide, dying by other diseases, and being alone. I mean, it seems like a fucking miserable existence. And the ones who didn't, the ones who did, like, get married and quote-unquote have normal lives, just had to be quiet about it. And I read this one account of this woman.
Just live with that secret.
Yeah, I read this one account of this woman who said that, like, every time her husband wanted to have sex with her, she would have flashbacks and she would, like, scratch at him. And he was like, "You're fucking crazy." And he didn't know why. And she couldn't tell him why.
What a nightmare.
But in the late 1980s, things in Korea began to change. The country was becoming more democratic, and there was a burgeoning women's rights movement. Hak-Sun became involved with one such organization and finally, for the first time, was ready to tell her story. And in fact, she was the only one. On August 14th, 1991, Kim Hak-Sun first told her story out loud to a church group that was trying to shed light on the Comfort Women issue. She was 67 years old by this time.
Oh my goodness.
She and two other plaintiffs filed a lawsuit in the Tokyo District Court, and for the first time ever, a Comfort Woman spoke publicly and forcefully about what she'd been through, what had happened to her.
Yeah.
And she was the only one using her real name. She was like, "Hi, my name is Kim Hak-Sun, and I'm telling you my story." And she was doing it publicly, like in front of newspapers and in front of cameras.
Wow.
And they aired this footage everywhere. It was like international news. So after 50 years of silence, the dam was broken.
That's incredibly brave of her to put herself out there.
Yeah, it absolutely, like, it caused a massive sea change. So it's in the 90s at this point. It's in the 90s, you know, everybody's a little bit more conscious of shit. I read this really great article by a Korean woman who I think is a professor who said that she believes that Kim Hak-Sun is the originator of the Me Too movement.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, I mean, yeah.
Why not?
So starting with a nationally broadcast news conference, Hak-Sun spoke about the atrocities she experienced and witnessed over and over and over and over and over again. And each time she gave the movement power and substance. She became a human face to a history that Japan had spent decades denying. Hak-Sun and other survivors formed, it's called like the Korean Council for Women Who Were Drafted into Sexual Slavery by Japan.
Oh my God.
So it's been shortened to just the Korean Council.
Okay.
That's what we're going to call it. So Hak-Sun and other survivors formed the Korean Council, and they held their first public demonstration on January 8th, 1992. They were protesting the visit of then Prime Minister Japan, Kiichi Miyazawa, who was coming to Seoul in South Korea. And they were like, fuck no.
Yeah.
Not without Japan acknowledging what they've done. So they did this huge demonstration. And since then, every Wednesday at noon, protesters gather in front of the Embassy of Japan in Seoul, Korea, to push for acknowledgement and reparations by the Japanese government for their role in the Comfort Women system. To this day.
But still nothing has been done.
We're going to get to that.
Okay.
But the fact that they have been doing this Wednesday demonstration, the only time that they didn't do it was after a huge earthquake.
Well, okay.
Yeah. So I think they've only missed 1 or 2 Wednesdays. Mm-hmm. So they've
been doing this for years.
They've, I think, had almost 2,000 Wednesdays now that they've been doing this.
Holy shit.
I mean, I can't even imagine the dedication you have to that.
Oh, yeah.
And it's like survivors are going to this every fucking Wednesday. So Kim Hak-Sun and the other women in the Korean Council, They have 7 goals or objectives to what they want. This is what their demands are, basically. Number 1, they want Japan to acknowledge that they committed a war crime, that these were war crimes. 2, they want Japan to reveal the truth in its entirety of military sexual slavery. They want it to be reveal the whole ass thing.
Mm-hmm.
Number 3, they want an official apology from the Japanese government. Number 4, they want legal reparations. Number 5, they want those responsible for the war crimes to be punished, like in a court of law. They want the history of what happened to be accurately recorded in textbooks and taught in schools.
Because information is key. And recording history, even the bad, fucking ugly parts, is necessary so that it doesn't happen again.
Yes, we have to actually know what happened in order to understand it.
Yes.
And they want a memorial erected for the victims and a historical museum to be established.
That would be amazing.
So those were their objectives starting in 1992. That's what they wanted. So there have been some informal letters of apology made by the Japanese officials. In fact, let me see if I can find that. Oh yeah, in 1993, here it is. So there have been these informal letters of apology made by the Japanese officials. One of them was Japan's chief cabinet secretary acknowledged and sent out a statement that was an acknowledgement and an apology in 1993. But that wasn't like a formal apology by the Japanese government. It was a statement that was sent out on paper.
What?
Japan as a government and as a country has never formally recognized that they subjugated an estimated, by the way, 200,000 women from all over the Pacific.
Oh my God. The lives.
Mm-hmm.
The lives they ruined.
There is significant documentation from Japan's own military records to show that the government was not only aware of the comfort stations, but that they had created a formal system of rules and recruitment.
The regulation of it, yeah.
This includes the requirement of women being expected by doctors weekly and that soldiers use condoms. Who provided those condoms? The government. They gave them condoms.
Yeah.
They gave them their fucking military money, their pension and whatever, and their salary,
mm-hmm.
and included an extra 1.5 yen for visiting comfort women. In addition, some of the women who were captured and forced into sexual slavery were actually Dutch nationals, because there was an area of Indonesia that was a Dutch territory, and it was very weird.
Mm-hmm.
So there were Dutch women, meaning white women, right?
Mm-hmm.
And after the war, Japanese military officials who were documented to have orchestrated and participated in the subjugation of those Dutch women, and who also participated in an attack on an American crew, were court-martialed officially, and an army major was executed.
Okay. For these women?
For the white women, yeah.
Okay.
Because the Americans and the Dutch were like, you can't do this. So that was why they were held accountable for that,
mm-hmm.
but nothing else. The women from Korea, from the Philippines, from Indonesia, Malaysia, China, etc.,
didn't matter.
Were not mentioned in the trial,
mm-hmm.
just the Dutch. So in an effort to placate the women, in 1995, Japan formed this nonprofit called the Asian Women's Fund, and they called on all private citizens of Japan to contribute to make up for the acts committed by the Japanese military.
So they're asking their society to pay the debts of what the government did?
That is correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. Not that that's not if somebody else wanted to make a nonprofit in Japan, that's fine. But having the government be like, this is our way,
mm-hmm.
then basically to me, it's like we get out of jail free card, right? So they're like, yeah, we're raising money for you. What more do you want? We sent out this letter that said we apologize. What more do you want? So they keep doing these things. They're like,
it's like acknowledging, saying I'm sorry, but not saying I'm sorry.
Yes.
Trying to do a good thing, but actually doing a really shitty thing disguised as good.
And it's never formal, right? To have this fund set up where Japanese citizens.
It's still not the government providing.
Yes, it's still not an official government reparations program.
I wonder how many of those soldiers who raped women were government officials.
Well, I mean, if they are in the military, they're a government official.
Mm-hmm. But in positions of power of
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
And
I
not
mean, like
wanting
I
to be
said,
called
there
out.
were ranks, right? So like
Mhm.
some of them were officers, some of them were majors and sergeants and shit. Like, yeah. It wasn't just like infantrymen.
Yeah.
So, many of the comfort women who came forward were real pissed about this Asian Women's Fund.
I would be too. It's so disregarding. Just kick it under the table kind of thing.
Yeah, for Hak-Sun and many of the other women, they saw the Asian Women's Fund as, quote, avoiding legal responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
And they thought it was flat out deception by the Japanese government.
Yeah.
Kim Hak-Sun said of this fund, quote, I did not come out with my shameful past because of money. What I strongly demand is restitution, not some money for consolation.
Oof. Strong words.
Oh, she is not fucking around.
Mm-hmm.
In her last interview in July 1997, she remained resolute in her belief that nothing would compensate for these war crimes except a formal apology. Quote, Japan must atone, she said. My wish is simple, to hear Japan saying sorry. This is what I desperately want. She said that even though she was sick at the time, she would continue to live and live and live and live until she could see them apologize. She was like, I'll live to be 112 if that's what it takes.
Oh, jeez.
Unfortunately, she did not get her wish. Kim Hak-Sun died of lung disease on December 16th, 1997 at the age of 73. So I mentioned this earlier. There was this acknowledgement and apology letter written by Japan's chief cabinet secretary in 1993. However, the Korean Council, which Kim Hak-Sun was part of, does not feel that Japan has properly apologized or atoned. To add insult to injury, over the years, various Japanese leaders have waffled as to the, quote, truth of the claims that the women were forced.
Mm-hmm.
In 2007, Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe said that there was no, quote, forceful action in recruiting the women.
That's a lie.
Yeah, and he's saying the women are lying.
Oh, because they have nothing fucking better to do than this.
Yeah. You know, one of the reasons why these women came forward in the first place at the age they were is because they were old. So they would no longer bring shame on their families.
Yeah.
Their families were all dead.
And to actually like have at least maybe some kind of peace of mind and say, this is my story.
Yeah.
And I'm finally going to talk about it.
Well, and like literally, you know, Kim Hak-Sun and some of the others were like, I'm old. That's why I'm doing this. Because I no longer give a fuck.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm old.
Yeah. And I've seen a lot of shit.
So in 2015, then South Korean President Park Geun-hye, I don't remember how to say that person's name, and Shinzo Abe reportedly signed a deal that was the, quote, final word on the, quote, comfort women issue. And the remaining survivors who were still alive were fucking pissed because they had not been consulted about this deal. Not a single one of them was in the room. None of them consulted or advised the president on this deal. And so they were like, what the fuck is this?
Probably just like, hey, we need to put the lid on this.
Yeah. Basically, they're wanting to have a more like workable relationship between the two countries. And this issue is pretty sticky because the Japanese continue to be like, I don't know what you want us to do. And they like a lot of the ways that the Japanese government is like getting around all of this is they're like, well, see, mass rape wasn't a war crime yet. Because it wasn't until after the Second World War that the United Nations was created.
Doesn't mean that it doesn't. Oh my God, that is bonkers.
Isn't it?
Oh
And
my
also,
God.
like, before that, the League of Nations had a list of, like, things. And while they didn't come right out and say rape, it said, like, dishonoring women was, like,
that
a war
shit still
crime.
happens today where they don't say.
Yes.
Yeah.
But that was, like, that was already in place when this happened. So, yeah, dishonoring women, quote unquote, dishonoring women was a war crime when it happened. And they're still like, nah, it's cool. Like,
Wow.
we are still hunting down Nazis to this day and prosecuting them.
Yes.
To this day. So why aren't we doing the same for these people who were in charge of this shit? Why? Because women don't matter. So anyway, this stupid fucking deal was officially canceled in 2018.
Good. I was like, what the fuck?
But in 2011, a statue was erected to memorialize the comfort women in Seoul. It is a Korean girl sitting on a chair facing the former Japanese embassy building, and she represents the Korean girls who were forced into sexual slavery. There is a little bird on her shoulder, symbolizes peace and freedom. Since this original statue was erected, others have since gone up. There was one in San Francisco. And every single time one of these statues gets put up, the Japanese government protests and condemns it.
Oh my gosh.
And says that it's divisive.
What the fuck?
You know what's divisive? Rape.
Yes.
On August 14th, 2018, that would be the exact date. August 14th, 1991 is when Hak-Sun came forward. So it's 27 years to the day. This became the first official Memorial Day of Comfort Women. So it's in her honor in South Korea. This day, August 14th, from here on out, is the Memorial Day for Comfort Women. And that's because of Kim Hak-Sun. While she did not achieve what she wanted to before she died, her legacy lives on. Alexis Dudden is a history professor at the University of Connecticut, and she said this of Kim Hak-Sun. She remains one of the bravest people of the 20th century. Her statement propelled researchers to unearth documentary evidence to support her claims, which began the still ongoing process of holding the Japanese government accountable for what the United Nations defines as a war crime and a crime against humanity. And that is the story of Kim Hak-Sun, the woman who broke her silence for comfort women and sexual slavery survivors everywhere.
Oh, that was a lot. It was an amazing story, but a lot.
So a lot.
A lot.
I did find there is an English version of the Korean Council's website. If you care to donate, you can go to womenandwar.net.
Okay. Amazing story. I can't wait to see a picture of that statue.
Yeah, the statue is really cool. So in 2015, there was that agreement that was being signed.
Mm-hmm.
So there was this mass protest at the statue because it's across the street from the former Japanese embassy.
Mm-hmm.
And there were all of these young people who were protesting this deal, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they stayed overnight. It was like negative 10 degrees. And they were like in sleeping bags with like hats and stuff on, and pieces of plastic got laid over them to like keep them warm.
Mm-hmm.
They woke up and their hair was frozen. Like even the like insulated thermoses were frozen to the core on the inside, all of the liquid. It was really, really fucking cold, and these people were staying night after night. And the Japanese government, the Korean government, the South Korean government, took away their sleeping bags.
Oh my gosh.
Took away their warm weather stuff. It was just fucked up. It was like really shitty. And they were saying that their demonstration was illegal. So I'm really moved by and heartened by the fact that there are people who still really care so adamantly about this issue that they're continuing the demonstration.
Mm-hmm.
Because by now there are very few living survivors. In fact, I watched a video of one survivor telling her full story. Oh, it was really hard. In fact, let me tell you her name. Her name is Kim Bok-dong, and it was really incredible to watch her tell her story. And at that time, she was like 98.
Oh my gosh.
And she died like a year after the video was posted. So I highly recommend that you listen to these stories because, again, I think it's important to bear witness to other people, but I think it's also important when it's a subject like this where everybody who was involved is dying. Like, we can't let the subject itself
can't let it slip.
Go away.
Yeah.
We have to continue to demand justice for them.
Because maybe that's one thing they're trying to do is just wait it out and let it just fizzle, disappear,
that's right.
Fade.
So let me tell you where I got some of my material from, because I think some of our listeners might be interested in seeking some of these out. I started with a New York Times obit in their Overlooked No More series, and that was by Cho Sang-hun. I also read the actual book of testimonies by comfort women, which is called True Stories of the Korean Comfort Women by Chong Sin-dae Young-hoo. I apologize for not getting names correct. I use Wikipedia for a lot of like background info. 70 years on, the comfort women speaking out so the truth won't die, which is on Amnesty International. There was there's a Korea Center for Investigative Journalism, and it's called Newstapa in Korea. And they had a series called My Wish, and it was about Kim Hak-Sun and the movement, and that's on YouTube. The Kim Bok-dong who told her story, that's a really profound video to watch. I highly recommend. And it's called Life as a Comfort Woman, Story of Kim Bok-dong, and it's by the Asian Boss on YouTube. Seeking the True Story of the Comfort Women, that was by Jeannie Suk Gerson for the New Yorker. And I did go to the Asian Women's Fund.
You took a peek?
Oh, I read the whole last thing.
Oh my goodness.
And they do have a lot of really original, like they have original primary sources that you can look at. And I can't read Japanese or Korean, so I can't like decipher them myself.
Something I don't know that you can do.
But I did have the pages translated.
Okay.
So I read a lot of the stuff that was original documents. So I did appreciate they have a digital museum, the Asian Women's Fund does. And of course, they believe they're doing the right thing. So they're a little biased on like how they think that the situation is resolved. Mm-hmm. But it was still helpful to see like the whole context of everything. So that is my story.
Amazing. Really good research, by the way.
Oh, it took me 3 weeks.
Oh my goodness.
At least 3 weeks.
Thorough. So thorough.
And I had to take a lot of breaks because this is a really heavy topic.
That was intense. Sorry if I was a little quiet. I was just really processing a lot. But amazing research. Really good job.
Thank
you.
And
I had no idea about the story. So thank you for bringing that to light.
Yes, and I hope everybody feels the same way. Thank you for sticking with me through that very tough story. Lucas, I'm sure this one was not your favorite to listen to and edit for us, but we appreciate all you do.
Thank you so much, Lucas.
And thank you to Jennifer Finch for our theme music.
All right. We'll process this one with us, folks. Until next time.
And if you want to support us on Patreon, please do so. You can get to us through our link tree in the show notes.
All right.
Thank you, everyone.